Hello everyone, and welcome to In His Time with Father Mike, Chapter 6, Taking Matters into Our Own Hands. Can't we just speed things up? Chuck Swindoll once wrote, "We must cease striving and trust God to provide what He thinks is best, and in whatever time He chooses to make it available." But this kind of trusting doesn't come naturally. It's a spiritual crisis of the will in which we must choose to exercise faith. How often have you heard it said, "Let go and let God"? We had this phrase framed on our bedroom wall during a particularly challenging time in our lives. 5 words that contain great advice, but words that are so hard to carry out. My spiritual director recently told me that over 30 years of service in the Lord's name, Jesus had really only said 2 things to him. "Steve, I love you, and will you trust me?" Trust. Just 5 letters that define the meaning of Christian living. The Cambridge English Dictionary defines trust as to believe that someone is good and honest and will not harm you, or that something is safe and reliable. What does it mean for you and for me to trust Jesus? I suggest it means we are to leave matters with Him and stop holding on to them. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding, the writer of the Proverbs tells us. As we read the Bible, we can see that a lot of what goes wrong with people occurs when they try and figure things out and take matters into their own hands. As an example of this, let's consider 2 of Israel's most famous kings, Saul and David. I am indebted to preacher and church leader, the Reverend Mike Breen, for some of my insights here. Saul was an impressive figure of a man. 1 Samuel 9 verses 1 and 2 tell us, "There was a man in Benjamin whose name was Kish, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward he was taller than any of the other people." In the next chapter, the prophet Samuel anoints Saul as the first human king of Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 10 verse 1 reads, "Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, 'Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies.'" This is a private anointing. Later on, Samuel demonstrated publicly by lots that Saul had been chosen by the Lord. Samuel said to all the people in verses 20 to 24 of 1 Samuel chapter 10, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among the people." And all the people shouted, "Long live the king!" Saul, which means to ask, was God's answer to Israel's request for a king to rule over them. Shortly after Saul was anointed king, Samuel prophesied a number of events that would happen to confirm God's choice of Saul as king. Samuel then instructed Saul to "Go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I am coming down to you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait, until I come to you and show you what to do." The Message paraphrase of the Bible describes what happened next. Saul waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. Samuel failed to show up at Gilgal, and the soldiers were slipping away right and left. So Saul took charge. "Bring me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." He went ahead and sacrificed the burnt offering. No sooner had he done it than Samuel showed up. Saul greeted him. Samuel said, "What on earth are you doing?" Saul answered, "When I saw I was losing an army from under me, and that you hadn't come when you said you would, and that the Philistines were poised at Michmash, I said, the Philistines are about to come on me in Gilgal, and I haven't yet come before God asking for his help. So I took things into my own hands and sacrificed the burnt offering." "That was a fool thing to do," Samuel said to Saul. "If you had kept the appointment your God commanded, by now God would have set a firm and lasting foundation under your kingly rule over Israel. As it is, your kingly rule is already falling to pieces. God is out looking for your replacement right now. This time he'll do the choosing. When he finds him, he'll appoint him leader of his people, and all because you didn't keep your appointment with God." 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 5 to 14. You see, because of his unresolved insecurities, Saul was not free to let go and let God. He had been instructed not to make a move until Samuel arrived to give him the word of the Lord. By not trusting God's timing, Saul showed his tendency to be moved by circumstances and external pressures rather than to trust and obey the voice of the Lord. Now, am I being too harsh on King Saul? After all, he did wait 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. And Samuel was a bit late, wasn't he? No sooner had he done it than Samuel showed up, the scriptures tell us. Much like Jesus in the Gospels, Samuel did not justify his timing or feel that he needed to explain himself. It may well have been a test for Saul, a matter of integrity, a matter of trust. Trust is the real issue here, not time. Timing becomes only the context in which Saul is given an opportunity to exercise his faith and trust in the God who called him through the prophet Samuel. Samuel grieved over Saul when the Lord later rejected him as king. But now it was time to choose Saul's successor. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 1 reads, "The Lord said to Samuel, 'How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons.'" As Samuel arrives on the scene, he invites Jesse and his sons to sacrifice to the Lord. Little did Jesse know, Samuel was also there to anoint one of his sons to be the new king of Israel. Verses 6 to 10 of 1 Samuel read like a beauty pageant. One by one, Jesse's sons pass in front of Samuel. Initially, Samuel assumes that the eldest and tallest son, Elijah, is to be the new king. But the Lord says to him in verse 14, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. It's the size of the heart that matters to God, not the size of the man." The new king would be a man after the Lord's own heart. All of Jesse's sons are presented to Samuel, and not one of them is chosen by the Lord to be Israel's new king. Samuel asks, "Are all your sons here?" To which Jesse replies, "There remains the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." The shepherd boy is called for and stands before Samuel, and the Lord speaks, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Samuel anoints David in front of his family, and we are told in verse 13 that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. David was handsome, to be sure, but he was chosen for his heart. There would be times during his long reign as king when David too would take matters into his own hands for a while. But his heart remained soft toward the Lord, and he would quickly turn in repentance and lay it all down again. David declared in Psalm 20, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Again he declares in Psalm 21, "For the king trusts in the Lord, and through the steadfast love of the Most High he shall not be moved." Because his heart was soft toward the Lord, David learned to listen. He learned to wait. He learned to comfort himself in God. He learned to obey. He learned to let go, and he learned to trust. An example of learning to let go and let God in the life of David can be found in 1 Samuel chapters 24 and 26. Saul had become at this time extremely jealous and threatened by David, his successor. They became enemies, so much so that Saul pursued David in order to kill him. David ended up hiding from Saul in the wilderness of En-gedi. Saul took 3,000 men to help find David, and when he and his men came to a cave, Saul stepped inside for a bathroom break, unaware that David and his men were hiding in the innermost parts of that very cave. Here was David's chance to get revenge on his enemy. David's men whispered to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord has said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." In other words, they whispered, "God has delivered him to you, David. Now's your time." What would David do? We read in verses 4 to 7 of 1 Samuel 24, "Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterward David's heart struck him, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words, and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went his way. At this point, Saul was still officially king, although in name only. The robe was a symbol of royal authority. David could have easily killed Saul, but he didn't. He showed restraint and respect for God's initial choosing of Saul, and he showed that he could be patient and wait for God's timing. After this incident, David and his men left the cave, and David called after Saul. He let Saul know that he could have killed him there and then. David declared in verses 11 and 12 of 1 Samuel 24, "See the corner of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you." David believed that Saul would be punished for his wrongdoing, but he was willing to let go and let God do it. Because of his love and reverence for God, David even felt bad about cutting off a portion of Saul's robe. At David's declaration, Saul wept and declared, verse 17, "You are more righteous than I." His concern, however, was still for himself, and although he calmed down, it was only temporary. David went off in a different direction, for he still did not trust Saul. Sure enough, 2 chapters later, Saul is pursuing David again. In 1 Samuel 26, David is hiding in the wilderness. Again, Saul has 3,000 men with him to help him capture David. Having learned where Saul and his men were camping, David took a man called Abishai with him and went into the camp at night. And there, we are told, lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. In similar words to those given to him while in the cave with his men, David is advised by Abishai, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. In other words, surely this is God's time for you, David. You don't even have to lift a finger to kill him. I'll do it for you. What would David do this time? But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. You see, David still did not take matters into his own hands. He continued to wait for God's timing. By the end of the book of 1 Samuel, we see that David's words to Abishai did indeed come true. Saul was badly wounded while fighting the Philistines, and killed himself by falling on his own sword. He did indeed perish in battle, as did his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day. God took care of the situation, as David believed and trusted he would. We all have a tendency to want to add something to what God has said to us. We want to speed things up, make things happen, manipulate the order of events and come out on top. We don't want to wait for God and trust in his timing. This can be our undoing and ends up only prolonging the desired outcome we were told to let go of and trust God for. How often in life do we lay things down for a while but soon pick them up again? A dear mother sent me an email with the following message. For 2.5 years, our oldest daughter in her late teens was lost to us. I prayed that she was in the Lord's care and that he would help her to return to us. She had met a young man and disappeared with him somewhere in the United States. Drugs were involved, and I prayed that she would overcome this influence on her life. Eventually, she contacted us but was reluctant to come back, thinking we wouldn't forgive her. For my husband and me, she was on our minds and in our hearts every day, and I kept praying for her return. The Lord was there for her and us, and she did return. She is now married to a wonderful man, has 2 grown children, and we love them all dearly. This could only be made possible by the Lord and all the blessings he has bestowed on our family. Dear Lord, I am so grateful. For 2.5 years, this dear mother had to let go and let God. Trust. In painful situations, taking things into our own hands is such a very real temptation. King David knew a thing or two about trusting in God's timing. He did not try to force the hand of God or impose a schedule upon the will of God. How about you and me? Can we put things into the hands of God and trust him as we wait for the right time? Here is a prayer of letting go by Jackie Trotman. Dear God, in this moment I let go of all thoughts and concerns. When I let go, I am able to receive. When my hands are formed into tight fists, I cannot open my hands to receive anything. When I hang on to tight control, when I close off my heart and my spirit, I cannot receive your blessings for me. I let go to receive your blessings. Letting go in this moment, I receive your loving presence around me and within me. Help me to let go when I am feeling overwhelmed, so that I may receive your peace. Help me to let go when I feel fear, so that in fear's place I may receive love and courage. I let go of problems and challenges in order to receive your guidance and clarity. I let go and trust you. I will not fall. You will catch me. I let go and trust in your still small voice. Help me not to struggle, but to surrender my struggle to you. I gladly receive this gift of letting go and letting you lead me and guide me. Amen.